Murphy Moretti is the most feared mafia boss in the city. Allie Carter is merely an exhausted maid working off a massive debt. Tonight, she collapsed right in front of his lethal eyes. Everyone in the estate expected her instant execution. Instead, Murphy stepped forward through the freezing silence. His heavy boots stopped beside her unconscious body. Without a single word, he bent down. He scooped her fragile, trembling frame into his arms. The guards froze in absolute terror. Their ruthless master never touched anyone, especially not a lowly servant. In the shadows of the staircase, little Lily watched everything with wide eyes. She clutched her doll tighter, holding her breath. Murphy carried Allie all the way to his private master's suite. He laid her down upon the forbidden velvet bed. Hours melted away in the suffocating darkness. Her eyes finally fluttered open. The sharp morning light pierced through the heavy curtains. She gasped, panic instantly seizing her chest. She tried to pull her hands away in sheer terror. She was holding his hand. Not just touching it, her fingers were locked tightly around his palm. Murphy was sitting quietly on the edge of the bed. His daunt gaze was fixed entirely on her face. There was no anger in his eyes, only a dangerous, suffocating intensity. "Let go," he whispered, his voice dangerously low. Allie trembled, too terrified to even breathe. I am sorry, sir," she stammered, tears welling up. Murphy didn't move his hand away. Instead, his thumb brushed softly against her knuckles. "You think you can just faint and escape me?" he murmured. The game had only just begun. The cold wind howled outside the reinforced windows of the sprawling estate. Shadows danced across the mahogany walls like restless spirits. Allie stared into his dark, fathomless eyes with absolute disbelief. Her heart hammered frantically against her ribs like a trapped bird. She could feel the raw power radiating from his massive frame. Every instinct in her body screamed at her to retreat, to hide, to disappear. Yet her fingers remained stubbornly, desperately entwined with his. Murphy did not flinch, nor did he break his intense, unblinking stare. He leaned slightly closer, invading her personal space with calculated dominance. "Do you have any idea whose bed you are lying in, Allie?" he asked softly. The silence in the room grew heavier, suffocating, and absolute. She swallowed hard, her throat feeling as dry as desert sand. I am deeply sorry, Mr. Moretti," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I did not mean to intrude. I collapsed from exhaustion." Murphy's lips curved into a cold, humorless smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Exhaustion is poor excuse for trespassing into my private domain," he countered. "You owe this estate a debt that would take a lifetime to repay." "I know, sir," Allie murmured, fighting the hot tears burning behind her eyelids. "I work every single day without rest to pay off every single penny. Working yourself to death under my roof serves no one," Murphy muttered sharply. "Especially not when you decide to pass out directly across my path." Allie finally managed to pry her fingers loose from his strong grip. She scrambled backward instantly until her spine hit the headboard. She pulled the velvet blanket over her trembling body like a shield. Murphy watched her defensive maneuvers with a strange flicker in his gaze. It was neither amusement nor pity. It was the look of a predator studying its prey. "Get up," he commanded, rising slowly to his full imposing height. "Breakfast is served in the formal dining hall in 20 minutes. "I cannot," Allie protested weakly, clutching the blanket tighter. "I am still dizzy and my shift started hours ago." "I make the rules here, Allie," Murphy said, pausing at the heavy double doors. "And my rule is that you eat a proper meal before you collapse again." He stepped out into the hallway, leaving her alone in the massive, silent room. Allie let out a long, shaky breath that she hadn't realized she was holding. Her limbs felt like lead, heavy and unresponsive to her commands. Yet she knew defying Murphy Moretti meant a fate worse than death. Slowly, agonizingly, she swung her legs over the side of the velvet bed. Her bare feet touched the freezing hardwood floor, sending a shiver through her spine. She forced herself to stand, steadying her balance against the ornate dresser. Her reflection in the antique mirror revealed a pale, ghost-like apparition. Dark circles bruised the skin beneath her hollow, frightened eyes. Her maid's uniform was wrinkled, stained with dust from the corridors. "You cannot afford to look weak," she whispered fiercely to her reflection. "If you show weakness, they will chew you up and spit you out." With a final surge of resolve, she smoothed down her skirt and walked out. The corridors of the Moretti estate were labyrinthine and perpetually dim. Every portrait on the wall seemed to watch her with silent judgment. As she turned the corner toward the grand staircase, a small figure appeared. It was little Lily, standing quietly beside the Croft banister. The 6-year-old girl clutched her worn-out porcelain doll against her chest. Lily's large, mournful eyes fixed on Allie with intense curiosity. "Are you the lady Daddy carried upstairs?" Lily asked in a tiny voice. Allie stopped in her tracks, her breath catching in her throat. "Yes, sweetheart," Allie replied softly, crouching down to eye level. "I am Allie. I work here." "Daddy never carries anyone," Lily whispered, leaning slightly closer. "Not even Ned and Lena when she cries. He just lets them walk." Allie's heart skipped a beat at the implications of the child's words. "He was just being kind because I fainted," Allie said gently, forcing a smile. "Daddy isn't kind," Lily stated with the brutal honesty of a child. "Daddy is a monster. Everyone in the city says so." Before Allie could respond, heavy footsteps echoed from the upper landing. Murphy descended the stairs with a cold, commanding aura surrounding him. Lily instantly stepped back, lowering her head in conditioned obedience. Murphy's sharp gaze shifted from his daughter to the exhausted maid. "Is there a problem here, Lily?" Murphy asked, his voice chillingly calm. "No, father," Lily whispered, clutching her doll even tighter. "Go to your tutor," Murphy instructed, waving a hand dismissively. The little girl nodded quickly and scurried away down the corridor. Murphy stopped a few feet away from Allie, towering over her. "You are moving too slowly, Allie," he remarked coldly. "I am on my way, Mr. Moretti," she replied, keeping her gaze lowered. "Walk beside me," he ordered, turning toward the private dining room. Allie hesitated for a split second before hurrying to keep pace. The formal dining hall was vast, dominated by a massive oak table. A spread fit for royalty sat untouched under silver chafing dishes. Murphy took his seat at the head of the table, motioning to the chair beside him. "Sit," he commanded, not looking up from his tablet. "Sir, I am a servant. I cannot not at your table," Allie protested. "I do not repeat myself, Allie," Murphy said, his voice dropping an octave. Reluctantly, Allie pulled out the chair and sat down on the very edge. A personal chef rushed forward to plate a steaming portion of food. "Eat everything on that plate," Murphy instructed without looking up. Allie picked up her fork, her hands shaking slightly under his scrutiny. Every bite tasted like ash in her mouth due to the suffocating tension. She forced herself to swallow, knowing disobedience was not an option. Murphy finally set his tablet aside and poured a cup of black coffee. "Why are you working off such a massive debt, Allie?" he asked suddenly. The question hit her like a physical blow, freezing her in place. That is my personal matter, sir," she managed to stutter out. Murphy leaned forward, resting his forearms on the polished table. Nothing in this estate is personal unless I decide it is, he stated flatly. Your debts belong to my ledger now. Tell me the truth. Allie felt the walls closing in around her, the air turning thin and sharp. She knew the terrifying reputation of the man sitting across from her. If he wanted to ruin her completely, it would take less than a word. My brother borrowed money from the wrong people, she whispered bitterly. When he fled the country, the debt fell onto my shoulders. And you foolishly chose to sell your freedom to clear his name, Murphy added. It wasn't a question, it was a cold, unfeeling statement of fact. I had no other choice, Allie said, her voice rising in defensive pride. He is my only family left in this miserable world. Murphy stared at her for a long, agonizing moment in absolute silence. The tension in the room thickened until it felt almost tangible. Family is a weakness, Allie, Murphy said quietly, his eyes darkening. In our world, weakness is a death sentence. Perhaps to a monster like you, Allie blurted out before she could stop herself. The moment the words left her mouth, she froze in sheer terror. She had just insulted the most dangerous man in the entire underground. The guards stationed near the doors instantly reached for their holsters. The air in the dining hall turned glacial, dropping several degrees. Murphy did not shout, nor did he slam his fist on the table. Instead, a slow, dangerous smirk spread across his stern face. Brave words for someone who fainted from hunger hours ago, he murmured. He stood up slowly and walked around the table until he stood beside her. He leaned down, his breath brushing against her shell-like ear. Do not ever test my patience again, Allie, he whispered softly. Or you won't just wake up holding my hand. You will wake up in a coffin. Before she could process the threat, he turned and strode out of the hall. Allie sat frozen in her chair, her heart pounding out of control. She had survived the first round, but the real storm was just beginning. Murphy Moretti ruled his empire with an iron fist. Allie Carter stood in the center of his private study. The walls were lined with ancient books and lethal weapons. Murphy sat behind a massive mahogany desk. His eyes narrowed as he reviewed the digital ledger. Your brother's debt is growing daily, Allie, he stated coldly. Allie gripped the edge of her skirt to stop her hands from shaking. I am working as hard as I can to pay every cent back, she replied. Hard work is not enough in my world, Murphy murmured. He stood up and walked slowly toward her. The distance between them vanished in a heartbeat. You belong to this estate until the last penny is cleared, he whispered. Allie looked up, her eyes flashing with a spark of defiance. I am a human being, not a piece of property, she shot back. Murphy's expression darkened into a dangerous mask. He reached out and gripped her chin with strong fingers. Never forget who saved you from the wolves, Allie, he warned. His breath was hot against her skin, sending shivers down her spine. Before she could answer, a soft knock echoed at the door. The heavy oak panel swung open just a fraction. Small, timid eyes peeked into the terrifying room. It was little Lily, clutching her porcelain doll. Murphy immediately released Allie's chin, his posture straightening. Lily, what are you doing here? Murphy asked, his voice softening just a fraction. I dropped my ribbon, the little girl whispered, her voice trembling. Allie instantly knelt down to help the child. Where did you drop it, sweetheart? Allie asked gently. Lily pointed a tiny finger near the heavy bookshelf. Allie crawled under the desk to retrieve the pink ribbon. As she handed it back, Lily grabbed Allie's thumb. "Don't make Daddy angry," Lily whispered quietly. "He is very scary when people lie to him." Allie smiled softly and patted the child's small head. "I won't lie to him, Lily. I promise." Murphy watched the interaction in dead silence. A complex emotion flashed through his dark eyes before vanishing. "Leave us, Lily," Murphy commanded gently. The little girl nodded and scurried out of the room. The heavy door clicked shut behind her, plunging the study back into tension. "You have a way with children," Murphy noted, his voice flat. "I have a heart, Mr. Moretti," Allie replied, rising to her feet. "Hearts are liabilities in our line of work," Murphy retorted sharply. "Then consider me your biggest liability," Allie whispered bravely. Murphy stared at her for a long, endless second. He did not yell. He did not threaten her with execution. Instead, a strange, grim acceptance settled in his gaze. "Go back to your duties, Allie," he commanded. "This conversation is not finished," she murmured. "It is finished for today." Murphy turned his back to her. Allie turned and walked out of the terrifying study. Her legs felt weak, but her resolve was stronger than ever. She walked down the long, echoing corridor. The shadows seemed less frightening now. She knew she was walking on the edge of a razor blade. One wrong move, and she would fall into the abyss. But he left the eastern wing unlocked, on purpose. Allie stared at the child in absolute astonishment. Was Murphy playing a dangerous game of cat and mouse? Or was this a trap designed to test her ultimate loyalty? Before Allie could process the thought, heavy footsteps echoed near. Lily vanished back into the shadows like a ghost. Murphy stepped out from the corner with a lethal aura. His dark gaze locked onto Allie with terrifying intensity. "Are you finished with your chores, Allie?" he demanded coldly. "Almost, Mr. Moretti," she replied, keeping her voice steady. Murphy walked slowly until he stood inches away from her. The raw power radiating from his massive frame was suffocating. "Curiosity killed the cat, Allie," he murmured near her ear. "And I am the one who buries the bodies." He reached out, his warm fingers brushing a stray lock of hair. "If you are looking for secrets, ask me directly," he added softly. Then he turned on his heel and walked away down the corridor. Allie stood frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs. She knew the eastern wing was calling to her. The truth about her brother lay hidden behind those locked doors. Night fell over the estate like a heavy, suffocating blanket. The hallways grew pitch black and deadly silent. Allie slipped out of her tiny quarters with silent footsteps. Her destination was the forbidden eastern wing of the mansion. The heavy oak door stood slightly ajar, just as Lily hinted. She pushed it open with trembling, ice-cold fingers. Moonlight poured through the tall, shuttered, stained glass windows. Rows of filing cabinets lined the dark, intimidating walls. Allie switched on her small flashlight and scanned the room. Her eyes locked onto a single open folder on the mahogany desk. It bore her family's last name in bold red letters. She rushed forward, her hands shaking uncontrollably as she opened it. Photographs of her brother tumbled out onto the wooden surface. He was standing with men she had never seen before in the underworld. A sticky note attached to the top read, "Protected under Moretti's ledger. Looking for answers, little bird." A deep voice echoed from the dark. Allie spun around in sheer terror, dropping the flashlight. Murphy stepped out from the shadows near the doorway. His face was a mask of absolute darkness and control. "You set me up," Allie whispered, her voice cracking with despair. Murphy didn't deny it. A dangerous smirk touched his lips. "I didn't set you up, Allie," he said softly, closing the distance. "I handed you the key." He reached out and caught her as her legs finally gave way. Her hands instinctively grabbed the lapels of his expensive coat. She was holding on to him again, exactly like the first night. Murphy looked down into her tear-filled, defiant eyes. "Now you belong to the truth, Allie," he murmured darkly. "And the truth belongs to me." Murphy Moretti stood in the dim shadows of the private security room, his cold eyes locked onto the live feed of the Eastern Wing. Allie Carter was still kneeling beside the open mahogany desk. Her hands trembled as she clutched the confidential documents. The truth about her brother's disappearance was finally within reach. Yet every second she spent in that room rushed her deeper into danger. Murphy did not send his guards to drag her away. Instead, he poured a glass of amber whiskey and watched in silence. "You are playing a dangerous game, boss," his chief security officer muttered. Murphy raised a single hand to silence the warning. "Let her see what she is looking for," Murphy replied coldly. "A trapped bird needs to know the cage door is wide open. Only then would it realize there was nowhere left to fly." Back in the Eastern Wing, Allie wiped a tear from her cheek. She tucked the crucial documents securely inside her Maid uniform. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird in a storm. She knew she had crossed a line from which there was no return. If Murphy wanted her dead, she would already be in a shallow grave. Instead, he wanted something far more complex and terrifying. She stood up slowly, her legs shaking from the overwhelming tension. She turned toward the heavy double doors of the study. To her absolute shock, the doors swung open on their own. Murphy stood in the hallway, leaning casually against the doorframe. The pale moonlight carved sharp shadows across his ruthless face. "Did you find what you were looking for, Allie?" he asked softly. His voice lacked anger, carrying a dark, hypnotic resonance instead. Allie clutched the hidden papers tighter against her chest. "You knew I would come here," she whispered, her voice trembling. Murphy pushed himself off the doorframe and took a slow step forward. "I know everything that happens under this roof, little bird," he murmured. He stepped just inches away from her, invading her space completely. She could smell the sharp, expensive scent of his cologne mixed with danger. "Are you going to punish me now?" she asked, lifting her chin with false bravery. Murphy reached out, his warm fingers gently tracing her jawline. "Punishment is reserved for those who disobey me," he whispered darkly. "And you are doing exactly what I anticipated." Before she could process his cryptic words, a soft sound echoed nearby. It was little Lily, standing quietly at the end of the dark corridor. The little girl clutched her worn porcelain doll against her chest. Her wide, mournful eyes looked up at her terrifying father and the maid. "Daddy," Lily whispered softly, breaking the suffocating tension. Murphy lowered his hand from Allie's face and looked at his daughter. "Go back to bed, Lily," he instructed, his tone softening instantly. Lily walked closer instead of retreating to her room. She reached out and grabbed a corner of Allie's apron. "Don't let him lock you away like he did to Mommy," Lily pleaded. Allie's breath hitched in her throat as the chilling words echoed. Murphy's expression hardened into an absolute mask of stone. "Lily," Murphy warned, his voice dropping an ominous octave. The little girl lowered her head, stepping back into the shadows. She scurried away, leaving the heavy silence behind her once again. Murphy turned his dark, impenetrable gaze back to Allie. "Children talk too much about things they do not understand," he muttered. "She speaks the truth of what she feels, Mr. Moretti," Allie retorted sharply. "And you are teaching her that fear is the only constant in life." Murphy closed the distance between them with terrifying speed. He pinned her gently against the cold wooden door behind her. His hands rested on either side of her head, caging her in. "You care too much about others when you cannot even say it yourself," he whispered. His lips hovered dangerously close to her ear, sending shivers down her spine. "Tell me, Allie, do you want to save your brother, or do you want to save me?" The question hit her like a physical blow, leaving her completely breathless. She stared into his fathomless eyes, unable to find a single word to say. The night outside raged with freezing wind and blinding snow. Inside the Moretti estate, the boundaries between captor and captive blurred. Murphy stepped back slowly, dropping his hands from the door. "Get some sleep, Allie," he commanded, turning away into the darkness. "Tomorrow, your debt takes a completely different path." Murphy Moretti walked down the iron-reinforced corridors of the subterranean vault. Allie Carter followed closely behind his massive, imposing frame. The air grew steadily colder, smelling of damp stone and old blood. Heavy steel doors loomed ahead like the gates of a medieval fortress. Guards with assault rifles stood at rigid attention on either side. They bowed their heads silently as their ruthless master approached. Murphy did not even spare them a glance. He punched a complex numeric code into the biometric keypad. The heavy steel mechanism hissed, unlocking with a deafening thud. "Step inside, Allie," Murphy commanded without looking back. Allie hesitated for a single heartbeat, her breath catching in her throat. The terrifying reality of her situation washed over her like freezing water. She was walking straight into the inner sanctum of the city's worst syndicate. She stepped past the threshold into a sprawling, dimly lit war room. A massive obsidian table dominated the center of the concrete chamber. Several high-ranking syndicate capos sat around the table in tense silence. Their sharp, lethal eyes instantly locked onto the unexpected female intruder. Murmurs of discontent rippled through the hardened criminals. "Boss, why is a lowly maid standing in the inner council?" one capo sneered. Murphy walked slowly to the head of the table and took his seat. He rested his elbows on the polished surface, interlocking his fingers. His dark gaze swept across his men with a freezing, murderous intensity. "She is here because I placed her here," Murphy stated softly. The chilling calm in his voice silenced the room instantly. Allie clutched the hidden documents inside her pocket with trembling fingers. She forced her legs to stop shaking, lifting her chin with defiant pride. "You brought me here to face your wolves, Mr. Moretti," she asked clearly. Murphy's lips twitched into a dangerous, dark amusement. "I brought you here to watch you feed them, Allie," he replied smoothly. He slid a thick manila folder across the obsidian table toward the center. "Explain to my captains why your brother's name is on this shipping manifest." The room erupted into sudden, volatile tension as the captains leaned forward. Allie stepped up to the table, her heart hammering against her ribs like thunder. She opened the folder and pointed directly at the encrypted signature. "My brother didn't steal from you," Allie stated, her voice cutting through the noise. "He was framed by the man sitting on your right, Vincenzo." A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the entire subterranean war room. Vincenzo's face drained of color, his hand twitching toward her hidden holster. "Lies," Vincenzo roared, leaping to his feet and slamming his fists down. Before he could draw his weapon, Murphy's gun was already in his hand. A single, deafening gunshot echoed through the concrete chamber. Vincenzo dropped to his knees, clutching his bleeding shoulder in shock. Murphy didn't even blink as wisps of smoke rose from the barrel. "No one speaks out of turn in my presence," Murphy whispered coldly. He slowly lowered his weapon, never breaking eye contact with Hallie. Allie stood frozen, the ringing of the gunshot vibrating in her ears. She had just witnessed the absolute brutality of the man who held her captive. Yet for the first time, that brutality was being used to defend her. Murphy stood up from his chair and walked around the table toward her. He stopped inches away, the scent of gunpowder clinging to his expensive suit. "You have the courage of a lion, Allie," he murmured softly for her ears alone. "But your education in my world has only just begun." He reached out, his warm hand gently cupping the back of her neck. Before she could process his touch, the side door clicked open quietly. Small, timid footsteps echoed softly against the stone floor. It was little Lily, slipping into the restricted war room unnoticed. The little girl clutched her worn porcelain doll against her chest. Her wide eyes looked at the blood on the floor without a single tear. "Daddy," Lily whispered, walking straight past the terrified capos. Murphy released Allie immediately and knelt down to his daughter. "You shouldn't be down here, Lily," Murphy said, his voice instantly softening. Lily ignored his warning, holding up a small, folded piece of paper. "I found this in the secret drawer under your desk," the little girl stated. Allie gasped softly as she recognized the handwriting on the note. It was the final piece of evidence proving her brother's innocence. Murphy took the paper from his daughter's tiny hands, his expression darkening. He looked up slowly, his dark eyes locking onto Allie's astonished face. "Your brother is alive, Allie," Murphy whispered. The ultimate truth. The room spun around her as the heavy weight lifted from her chest. She reached out blindly, her fingers catching the lapel of Murphy's coat. She was holding onto him once again, tears finally spilling over her lashes. Murphy wrapped his arms around her fragile frame, pulling her against his chest. The monster of the underworld had just become her only sanctuary. Murphy Moretti stood over the bleeding form of Vincenzo. The smell of cordite hung heavily in the subterranean war room. None of the remaining capos dared to make a single sound. Allie, Carter stared at the cold, lethal man beside her. The blood on the marble floor was a stark reminder of his underworld nature. Yet, for the first time, she felt entirely safe in his presence. Murphy slowly holstered his smoking weapon. His dark eyes shifted from the traitor to Allie's pale face. "Take Vincenzo to the lower cells," Murphy ordered without emotion. Two massive guards moved instantly, dragging the screaming man away. Murphy turned his full attention back to the frightened maid. "You have the evidence you needed, Allie," Murphy said quietly. "Your brother's name is cleared across every ledger in this city." Allie clutched the manila folder tightly against her chest. Tears spilled over her eyelashes, hot and unbidden. "Thank you, Mr. Moretti," she whispered, her voice breaking. Murphy stepped closer, closing the distance between them. He reached out, his warm thumb gently wiping a tear from her cheek. "You don't need to call me Mr. Moretti anymore," he murmured. The hardened criminals around the table averted their eyes in shock. Before Allie could process his words, the side door creaked open. Little Lily slipped into the room, clutching her worn porcelain doll. She walked straight past the frozen guards toward Murphy and Allie. "Daddy, I found the rest of the papers," Lily whispered softly. She handed a small, yellowed envelope up to Allie. Allie opened it with trembling fingers in the dim light. It contained photographs of Murphy and a woman who looked strikingly like Lily. "Your mother," Allie breathed out, looking up at Murphy's dark eyes. Murphy's jaw tightened into a rigid, impenetrable line. "She was taken from this estate years ago," Murphy spoke softly, "and I hunted down every single person responsible." Allie suddenly understood the profound darkness that consumed his soul. He wasn't just a ruthless mafia boss. He was a broken man, protecting his own. She dropped the folder and reached out, touching his chest. Her hand rested gently over his heart, feeling its steady, heavy beat. She survived the monsters, Murphy," she whispered his first name. "And now you don't have to carry the weight all by yourself." Murphy stared down at her with a look of utter vulnerability. It was a look no one in the underworld had ever witnessed. He wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her into his embrace. The ambient tension in the war room dissolved into absolute silence. The capos discreetly stood up and filed out of the room, one by one. Only Murphy, Allie, and little Lily remained in the vast concrete chamber. Lily stepped forward, wrapping her tiny arms around Allie's legs. "Staying with us?" the little girl pleaded softly. Murphy looked down at both of them, his dark eyes softening completely. "She isn't going anywhere," Murphy answered for Allie, the final pieces of their shattered lives locked into place. The cold wind howled through the ventilation shafts of the subterranean vault. Shadows stretched long and distorted across the concrete walls. Allie breathed in the scent of cedar and danger radiating from Murphy. She had walked into this fortress as a debt-ridden slave. Now she stood as an equal in the storm that surrounded him. Murphy rested his chin lightly against the top of her head. His hands kept her securely pinned against his broad chest. "The debt is erased, Ali," he whispered against her hair. "You are free to leave whenever you desire." Ali pulled back slightly to look directly into his dark eyes. "Do you want me to leave, Murphy?" she challenged softly. Murphy's gaze flared with an intense, possessive heat. "Never," he answered without a single second of hesitation. Lily looked up at them with a bright, innocent smile. "Fanny doesn't leave each other," the little kid declared. Murphy looked down at his daughter, a rare smile touching his lips. "She's was right," Murphy murmured, tightening his grip on Allie. The war room fell back into a peaceful, heavy quiet. The blood on the floor was already being scrubbed away by the guards. The nightmare of the past was finally losing its grip on the estate. They walked out of the vault together as the heavy steel doors locked. The corridors of the mansion felt warmer than they had ever been. Allie knew the road ahead was filled with hidden enemies. She also knew she would never walk it alone again. Murphy walked beside her, his hand firmly holding hers. The Mafia Boss had found his anchor in the middle of the chaos. And Allie had found her home, inside the darkest heart of the city. Murphy Moretti stood at the head of the grand dining table. The room was illuminated by the warm glow of crystal chandeliers. The heavy atmosphere of dread that once filled the estate had vanished. Allie Carter sat to his immediate right in a stunning, elegant dress. Her hands no longer trembled. Her posture was proud and steady. The debt that once chained her to this place was nothing more than a memory. Across the table, little Lily giggled audibly as she played with her doll. The child's laughter echoed softly through the vast, magnificent hall. The remaining high-ranking capos stood around the perimeter in respectful silence. They no longer looked at Allie with disdain or suspicion. They recognized her as the anchor of their ruthless, feared master. Murphy poured a glass of red wine and raised it slowly. His dark eyes swept across the room before resting entirely on Allie. "To new beginnings," Murphy stated, his deep voice carrying absolute authority. "To family," Allie added softly, clinking her glass gently against his. The wine tasted sweet, rich, and remarkably liberating. She looked around the room she had once feared as a dungeon. Now, it felt like a fortress built solely to protect the three of them. Murphy reached across the polished mahogany table and took her hand. His fingers intertwined firmly with hers, exactly like that first night. Only this time, there was no panic, no terror, and no desperate escape. "You are never leaving this house, Allie," he whispered softly for her alone. "I wouldn't dream of it," she replied with a serene, confident smile. Lily climbed down from her chair and ran over to them. She leaned against Allie's knee, looking up with adoring eyes. "We are a real family now," the little girl declared happily. Murphy leaned back in his chair, a rare, genuine smile gracing his face. The monster of the underworld had finally found his peace. The flickering candlelight cast long, graceful shadows against the velvet drapes. Outside the reinforced glass, the city lights twinkled like distant, harmless stars. The bitter winter storm had finally blown itself out into the silent night. No lingering threat could breach the heavily guarded perimeter of the Moretti estate. Every corner of the mansion felt transformed by the warmth of genuine connection. Allie took another slow sip of her wine, savoring the profound stillness. She remembered the agonizing despair of her very first night under this roof. Back then, she had been nothing more than a terrified, debt-ridden servant. Now, she was the undisputed heart of the most feared empire in the underworld. Murphy watched every subtle change in her expression with unwavering devotion. His deep, possessive love was no longer a cage, but a sheltering harbor. "The empire is secure," Murphy murmured, leaning closer to her ear. "And no one will ever dare to threaten your safety again." Allie turned her head to meet his dark, fathomless gaze with absolute trust. "I know," she whispered back, her voice steady and full of quiet strength. Lily clapped her tiny hands together, breaking the quiet, romantic tension. "Can we have dessert now?" the little girl asked, with an innocent grin. Murphy laughed, a deep, resonant sound that shocked his watching guards. Their ruthless master was truly, irrevocably transformed. He signaled a servant with a slight nod of his commanding head. A silver platter, bearing a rich chocolate cake, was brought forward immediately. Lily cheered and climbed back into her high-backed velvet chair. The dinner continued in an atmosphere of unprecedented warmth and joy. The ghosts of the past had finally been laid to rest in the dark. Allie leaned her shoulder against Murphy's broad, solid frame. She knew challenges would arise in the unforgiving world outside. Yet as long as they stood together, no storm could ever tear them apart. The final dawn broke over the Moretti estate. The winter frost melted under the piercing rays of the morning sun. The dark clouds that had haunted the grounds for years were entirely gone. Murphy Moretti stood on the expansive marble balcony. His dark eyes swept across the vast, secure empire below him. Every sentry, every capo, and every guard knew who truly ruled. Allie Carter walked out onto the balcony, wrapped in a warm cashmere shawl. The morning breeze kissed her face, carrying no chill, only absolute peace. She stepped up beside the ruthless mafia lord. Murphy turned his head, his gaze softening instantly at the sight of her. He reached out, his strong arm wrapping securely around her waist. "The city belongs to us, Allie," Murphy whispered, his voice deep and steady. "It belongs to all of us," Allie corrected softly, resting her head on his chest. From the doorway, little Lily rushed out with a joyful squeal. She clutched her porcelain doll in one hand and grabbed Allie's skirt with the other. "Can we go to the garden now?" Lily asked with sparkling eyes. Murphy looked down at his daughter, a rare, profound smile gracing his lips. "We can go anywhere you want, little bird," Murphy answered gently. Down in the courtyard, the high-ranking capos stood in disciplined alignment. They bowed their heads in absolute reverence as the family appeared above. There was no rebellion left to fear, no hidden traitor waiting in the shadows. The blood debts of the past had been completely paid in full. The Moretti name was now an unbreakable dynasty of power and loyalty. Allie looked back at the Grand Master bedroom behind them, the room where she had once trembled in desperate, suffocating fear. That broken, debt-ridden maid was nothing more than a ghost of the past. She was now the queen of this underworld kingdom, hand in hand with its king. Murphy squeezed her waist gently, sensing the distant memory in her eyes. "The past cannot touch us anymore," Murphy promised, his voice like iron. "I know," Allie replied, her fingers locking tightly with his. Lily tugged insistently at Allie's dress, laughing without a single care in the world. The sound of the child's laughter echoed against the high stone walls. It was the ultimate victory over the darkness that had tried to consume them. Murphy lifted Lily into his arms with effortless strength. He kept his other arm securely around Allie's shoulders. Together the three of them descended the grand marble staircase. The heavy oak doors of the mansion swung wide open to the bright world outside. The empire was secure, the family was whole, and the legend of the Moretti dynasty began anew. Every corner of the expansive estate breathed a new, untainted life. The immaculate garden stretched out like a green ocean beneath the morning sky. Dewdrops shimmered on the petals of the blooming white roses. Security patrols moved with quiet, absolute efficiency along the perimeter walls. Not a single whisper of discord remained within the syndicate's domain. Allie walked down the winding stone path, with Lily holding her right hand. Her left hand remained securely intertwined with Murphy's strong fingers. She looked back at the imposing architecture of the Maid manor house. The limestone facade caught the brilliant light of the morning sun. It no longer resembled a cold fortress of judgment and silent punishment. It was a sanctuary forged through fire, blood, and unyielding devotion. "Are you thinking of the day you arrived?" Murphy asked quietly. His sharp gaze detected the fleeting shift in her quiet demeanor. Allie turned her head, offering him a gentle, reassuring smile. "I was remembering how terrified I was of your shadow," she confessed. Murphy stopped walking and pulled her slightly closer to his side. "My shadow only exists to keep you hidden from the world," he murmured. "And now, you step into the light beside me. Forever." Lily looked up at them with a mixture of curiosity and pure joy. "Can we feed the swans in the lake, Daddy?" the little girl asked. Murphy nodded, his stern features melting into paternal tenderness. "Anything you wish, Lily," he answered with quiet indulgence. They strolled together toward the crystalline expanse of the private lake. The water reflected the endless blue of the clear spring sky. Swans glided gracefully across the smooth surface in silent harmony. For the first time in her life, Allie felt a complete absence of fear. The heavy chains of poverty and debt were shattered beyond repair. Her brother's name was cleared across every ledger in the underworld. and the man who controlled the city's fate was entirely devoted to her. Murphy watched the sunlight dance across Allie's radiant face. He knew the ruthless world outside would always test their boundaries. Rivals would rise, alliances would shift, and enemies would test his reign. Yet looking at Allie and Lily, he knew his true strength was absolute. No bullet could pierce the armor of the family they had built. No betrayal could fracture the profound trust binding their souls together. Lily broke away, laughing as she chased a butterfly across the grass. Murphy wrapped both arms around Allie from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "You are my greatest victory, Allie," he whispered against her skin. Allie leaned back against his solid, unyielding frame with total surrender. "And you are my final home, Murphy," she whispered back to the King of Shadows. The morning breeze carried their whispered vows into the open air. The Moretti dynasty stood untouchable, anchored by an unbreakable love.